By 1200, Christians across Europe were forbidden from lending money at interest. So they outsourced the job to the one group they'd already locked out of everything else. Walk with me to the exhibit on medieval commerce. What you're looking at is a problem nobody wanted to solve honestly. The Catholic Church around the 11th century had declared that charging interest on loans, what they called usury, was a sin. Mortal, damnable, no exceptions. For Christians, lending money was spiritually off-limits. But medieval Europe was growing. Towns were expanding. Merchants needed capital to buy wool, grain, spices. Kings needed loans to fund wars. Farmers needed credit to survive bad harvests. The demand for lending didn't disappear just because theology said no. It just went underground, or rather, it went sideways. Here's where Jewish communities enter the story. And this is crucial. They didn't choose this role. Church law forbade Jews from owning land, joining guilds, or practicing most professions. They were locked out of the Christian economy entirely. But the usury ban didn't apply to them in the same way. Jewish law permitted lending to non-Jews at interest. So by the 12th century, a strange asymmetry had formed. Christians needed credit but couldn't legally provide it. Jews were excluded from other work but could lend. The system didn't exist because anyone thought it was fair. It existed because exclusion and demand had collided. Let me show you a document from 13th century England. This charter right here gives a Jewish moneylender named Aaron explicit permission to lend at a fixed rate, say 2 pence per pound per week. The king issued it. The king benefited. Nobles benefited. Merchants benefited. But notice what they never said publicly. They never said, "We need Jewish moneylenders because we've forbidden Christians from doing this work, and we've forbidden Jews from doing everything else." Instead, the narrative that emerged was simpler and uglier. It painted Jewish lenders as greedy, as predatory, as fundamentally alien to Christian society. The system they'd created was reframed as proof of Jewish nature. And this is where the irony cuts deepest. Jewish moneylenders weren't outliers. They were essential infrastructure. By the 14th century, they'd financed cathedrals, castles, wars, and merchant ventures across England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire. They were the credit system. But here's what neither the borrowers nor the lenders fully understood yet. This arrangement was unstable. It depended on a fiction, that the system was temporary, that it was necessary evil, that it could be abandoned. It couldn't. And that fragility would have consequences. In 1290, King Edward I of England faced a problem. He owed enormous sums to Jewish creditors, debts that had financed his wars in Wales and Scotland. He couldn't repay them, so he did something simpler. He expelled every Jew from England, all of them. In one act, he erased his creditors and their claims. What Edward demonstrated was that the entire system rested on a single, fragile thing: the goodwill of those in power. Once that broke, there was no law, no contract, no appeal. The credit system that had been built on Jewish exclusion could be dismantled by the same hand that had built it. France followed. So did Spain eventually. Across Europe, Jewish communities were expelled, and with them went the credit networks they'd built. What replaced them? Slowly, Christian bankers. Medici in Florence, merchant bankers in Venice, eventually the whole apparatus we'd recognize today. But those Christian bankers didn't invent anything new. They inherited a system, a vocabulary, a set of practices that Jewish moneylenders had already built and proven worked. The irony is architectural. Modern finance was built on the foundation of a profession that existed only because of exclusion. The stigma, though, persisted. For centuries, lending money at interest was still seen as vaguely disreputable, a necessary evil, not an honorable profession. That language echoed the medieval framing. Even as Christian bankers became wealthy and powerful, there was still a whisper of shame attached to the work they did. What's striking, looking back from here, is how much of the modern credit system was shaped by people trying to solve a problem created by exclusion. Collateral requirements, interest rates, credit terms, the very idea that lending is a skill, all of it was developed by medieval Jewish moneylenders working within impossible constraints. They weren't saints. They charged high interest rates, sometimes predatory ones because they had to. They faced constant hostility, legal restrictions, and the threat of expulsion. But they also created something that worked. They proved that lending could be systematized, measured, and scaled. The system they built lasted longer than they did in Europe. It was copied, refined, and eventually handed off to others. And the stigma they carried, that lending was vaguely disreputable, that it required careful justification, that it existed in a moral gray zone, that lasted even longer. Here's what matters now. When you look at how credit works today, you're looking at a system with medieval roots. Not because anyone planned it that way, but because it was built by people who had no other options. Exclusion created necessity, necessity created innovation, and innovation became infrastructure. The medieval Jewish moneylenders didn't invent lending, but they invented the mechanisms that made modern lending possible, and they did it while being despised for it. That contradiction, essential and stigmatized at the same time, is baked into finance itself. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. Subscribe to explore more systems that shaped finance. There's a new untold history every week. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.